So welcome everyone to today's webinar with GlobeScan, MSC and Nomad Foods Europe. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. We're starting in just a couple of minutes. So welcome, and just please hold in there until we make a start. Just waiting for a few more people to join. Welcome if you've just joined us, just signed into our webinar. We are about to start at the top of the hour, and we'll just allow a few more people to log in this morning. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to start our webinar in a few minutes. Thank you if you've just signed up, just signed in and joining us for our webinar about the rise of the conscious food consumer. We'll just wait for a few more people to join. The numbers are rising quite rapidly, so I'll give a few more people a chance to log in and sign up. Welcome if you've just joined us. We will start in a few minutes. We are going to be looking at quite a lot of data and consumer insights today that we're going to go through, and there will be a panel discussion as well. All the materials will be available afterwards for you to access, so you can sit back and enjoy it. Welcome if you're just joining us. I will give everyone another minute because we've got lots of people signing in right now. Just a few more minutes and a few more seconds, shall I say, and we will make a start. Right, I think we're about ready to make a start. So welcome everyone to the GlobeScan and MSC webinar on the topic of the rise of the conscious food consumer, COVID, climate and conservation. And today we're going to be exploring some learnings from public opinion research that we've conducted this year. And this is one of 3 webinars that we're hosting with the MSC this week. The first one was on Tuesday in North America. Then we were in Asia Pacific last night. And today for the final webinar, we're here in Europe. So we've got our agenda for the webinar. We're going to start with some consumer trends from research conducted by the MSC and GlobeScan back in February, which now I think feels for all of us like a very long time ago, that pre-COVID time. How have things changed since then? So we're going to look then at a few findings from GlobeScan's Healthy and Sustainable Living Survey, and that was conducted in June, so several months later. We'll then get some reactions from our panelists to the findings, and we'll have an official Q&A about what's next for consumers, companies and organisations towards the end. So please do feel free to post your questions in the Q&A. So first of all, I'd like just to start with the introductions. I'm Caroline Home. I'm a Senior Director at GlobeScan, an insights and strategy consultancy who focuses on sustainability, reputation and brand. And I'm very pleased indeed to introduce you to our panelists for today. First of all, we have Richard Stobart, who's Head of Marketing at the Marine Stewardship Council, and he's a longtime friend and partner of GlobeScan. Richard, can you just tell us a bit about the MSC and why this topic of the conscious consumer matters to you? I think you actually came up with the title, so it's obviously close to your heart.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, the MSC commissions this research with GlobeScan every 2 years. We use it for our own purposes, so setting our strategy for consumer marketing is one of those, but also to share with our partners. A lot of our retail and brand partners do not do this level of detailed research into seafood consumers. So it adds value to those partnerships we have. And really we're exploring this today from my perspective because everyone is asking, how is COVID affecting the area of work that we are currently in. And I think there are some very interesting findings from the two research pieces that we've got coming up. And I think it'd be a really interesting discussion at the end as to how we might pop out of this crisis and what normal might look like at the end of it.
And I also have a lot of pleasure to introduce Annelies Selander from Nomad Foods Europe. She's the Sustainability Director there. And can you just tell us a little bit about Nomad and why you're joining us for this discussion today?
So yes, of course, good morning everyone, and great to be here today. So Nomad Foods is Europe's largest frozen food business, and we're a pure frozen food player, and we've got this brilliant portfolio of some real family favorites, fish fingers, garden peas, from really iconic brands like the Birdseye, the Eagle, the Findus that you will probably have heard of. So why I really thought this is a topic that I wanted to, bring some learnings to is that I'm a passionate believer of consumer power, and I work for a frozen food brand. And we know, all of us, that food has a massive role to play in addressing climate change. And if you think about it, we eat what, 3, 4, 5 times a day, and I'm just constantly think about the impact it will have if we can just make small changes in each of those consumption occasions. Think about the impact that would have from an environmental perspective. And with COVID, and I know we'll get to that later on, we're just seeing some of those changes and some of that awareness actually happening quicker. So I really look forward to looking into some of the results from the research, and then talk about how we can take that further together.
Great, thanks Anneli, and thanks Richard. So let's get on with the findings from our consumer survey conducted just before the pandemic fully hit Europe in such a forceful way. So this was research that was done in partnership with the MSC and GlobeScan. The objective was to understand consumer attitudes and behaviour, and it's the third wave of a biannual global research survey. The first one was back in 2016, and the survey was conducted online across 23 countries in total, and it was between the end of January and mid-March. And we've included 15 European countries. If you see, they're circled there and coloured in dark blue. I won't list them, but you can see that it's a lot of different markets in Europe. And the sample size was 1,000 consumers per country in the larger countries and 600 in the smaller ones. So the total number of people who participated in the study was over 14,000, which includes 11,500 seafood consumers. So we will be looking sometimes at the general public, but quite a bit at seafood consumers in what we're going to share in a moment. And we will have a lot of data to look at. So I'm going to share lots of charts and numbers with you, but please don't worry about taking notes. We will share all of the material afterwards, as well as the recording from this session. So we're going to start by just looking at the context of what environmental issues people were most worried about earlier this year. So this first chart that we have up here shows the global results, and this shows the percentage of people who chose each of these issues as one of their top 3 concerns. So early in 2020, we can see at the top there that climate change is the most worrying environmental issue. We got 53% of people putting that in their top 3. And over the years, what we have seen is that this has rapidly risen up the agenda, and it's now the most concerning issue in nearly all countries across the world. We can also see on this chart, just a bit further down in that lighter blue bar, that health of the oceans is ranked 6, with 34% of people globally putting that in their top 3. And really, that was the global results. When we look at Europe, the main difference between the global results and the results here in Europe is that it's really around the rainforest one. So the loss and destruction of rainforest is actually considered more concerning by consumers in Europe than globally. So that's at number 3 in Europe, with 38% of people nominating that in their top 3. And health of the oceans, further down there, again in that lighter blue bar, that's ranked number 6, which is pretty much the same as globally. So when we go on to, that was for Europe, well, there are obviously quite big differences across the different countries, across those 15 countries. And we can see some of those variations here in terms of how important people feel health of the oceans actually are. So towards the left-hand side of this, chart that we've got up here, we can see that health of the oceans is ranked highest in those countries where the green boxes are just below it. So that's Spain, where we have 47% of people putting ocean health in the top 3, Norway, Sweden, and France, putting high importance to health of the oceans. And then over towards the right, we know that health of the oceans is ranked a bit lower in those countries further over on the right, including the Netherlands, where it's ranked 22% of people put it in their top 3. So we then asked people to choose the top 3 ocean issues that they're worried about. So a bit more of a focus on the oceans. And we found that 3 things really stood out in Europe, and they're shown on here. So ocean pollution was the top concern, and this has significantly increased in the past 2 years. So this year, 69% of people say it's one of their most concerning issues. 2 years ago, that was at 66%. So that's a significant increase. The second one is overfishing. That's still a high concern. And then we see at the bottom there the effects of climate change on the ocean. And again, that has increased significantly since 2018, from 27% to 34% of people putting it into their top 3. So we can see this sort of climate change theme is something that people are worried about. They're connecting it with all sorts of things, including the oceans. There are a few differences across different age groups. So if we look at the 2 kind of extremes, so people who are the over 55s tend to be more worried about those top 2. They tend to be most worried. They're focused on pollution, especially plastics, which has had so much media coverage and TV documentaries, and about overfishing as well. With younger people, those in the 18 to 34 group, they tend to have a wider set of concerns, a wider spread of concerns. Yes, they're worried about these top 3, but there's also other things that they're worried about, like rising sea levels and things like poor working conditions and slavery in the fishing industry. So just more of a spread of concerns amongst younger people. And then when we ask people to start connecting ocean issues to their own seafood consumption, and we found that 2/3 or 66% of Europeans think that in order to save the ocean, we have to consume fish only from sustainable sources. And people feel strongly about this across Europe, but particularly in France, Italy, Spain, the UK, Switzerland, and Finland. So that's where people are particularly concerned about sustainable seafood consumption. And then we also asked people to think a little bit about the future of seafood. And then we found here that 30% of seafood consumers don't think that their favorite fish species will be available to eat 20 years from now. And that's that dark blue block on the pie chart that you can see there. So that is still a minority. We've got 49% of people who think their favorite fish will be available. But this is a large minority of people who are concerned that it won't be what they like to eat won't be available in the future. And it is a bigger number in France, in Portugal, and also in Poland. So I've just paused for a moment there. And I just a quick question for you, Richard. How does this we've got this new information about the future, how people see the future of fish. It's a new question we added this year. How has that informed, or how is that informing how the MSC works?
Yeah, I think it steps up the urgency of our mission to end overfishing, Caroline. And this isn't my original thought, but one of the things that excites me about working in this particular area of seafood sustainability is whereas the timelines for solving many of the world's environmental issues, such as climate change, are considerable and very long term, it is conceivable with the will of governments, business and civil society that we could end the majority of overfishing within our lifetime. And it really excites me to be working in an area where we can make that kind of difference within the timescale of a lifetime. And I genuinely believe that's where the urgency is. It's one of those big environmental issues that we can start to tackle now and make very, very good progress on in the next decades.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just go back now to the sort of current time. We asked, we had a lot of questions about people's attitudes and beliefs, but we did also ask them about the action that they're taking now and the action that they're willing to take in the future. So we've just put up some findings on this, and I'll just explain what we can see on here, which is that those darker blue bars show the percentage of people who say that they've taken different types of actions in the past year in terms of fish and seafood purchase. The lighter blue bar, that shows the percentage of people who haven't taken action over the past year in these things, but they are willing to take action in the future. So on the left there, you can see that 23% of people say in the past year, they've switched to a brand that protects the oceans, and 33% say they intend to do this. And then if we move over to the right, a couple of bars, we can see that 7% of people, just 7% say that they've used a guide or app to help them with their fish purchase decisions, but many more, 23% say that they're willing to do this. And across all of these things, you can see that there is this large gap between intention and action. So one question really, I think, is how do we bridge that gap? So we know that there is a thirst for more information on sustainability and traceability of fish and seafood products from what we can see on here. And we found that 87% of Europeans want better information so that they can feel confident that they're not buying unsustainable fish or seafood. We also know that 71% want to hear more from companies about the sustainability of their fish and seafood. And then 66% want to know that the fish they buy can be traced back to a known and trusted source. So in terms of bridging that gap, overall, people want to hear more about sustainability and provenance to ensure that they're not buying unsustainable products. A bit more about this information is that consumers want this information to be independently verified. So that pie slice on the left-hand side, that shows that 73% of seafood consumers feel that claims about sustainability should be clearly labelled by an independent organisation. And we also know that they are more aware of eco-labels. And the slice on the right just shows that 46% of people say that they notice eco-labelled products when they're shopping. So we've looked at some of the information people want, some of the actions they're taking and that they want to take, but what's actually motivating them when they go shopping? What's motivating when they have to make purchase decisions? So in order to answer that question, we asked seafood consumers which things, and we presented them with a list of things, list of the things that are on the right-hand side there. And we asked them which ones are most and least important when they recently purchased a fish or seafood product. And as you can see, that list includes lots of different types of motivators. Some are sort of primary purchase drivers, things like taste, price, safety, and others are more kind of secondary purchase drivers, things like those related to sustainability and traceability and many others. And we used a maximum differentiation methodology to calculate what the level of importance was on each of these drivers on people's actual purchase decisions. So when we look at the results for this, it's quite a kind of a long chart here, but I should just take you through it now. We can see that the seafood sector is really dominated by, right at the top there, by quality and health types of considerations. We are a little bit later, we're going to show some of the results for the food sector as a whole, and we'll see there's a few differences there, but this is for seafood specifically. So we can see that freshness, health, safety and taste, those ones are the top seafood purchase drivers. And then next in line, sustainably sourced is the 5th most important driver in Europe. It's ranked higher than price in all European countries, which really is a shift that happened. We saw that happening in 2018 in Europe. It's now rising up the rankings in Asia Pacific and North America as well. And a couple of other points to highlight here are that traceability is more important than it was last year. So if you just look a little bit further down to that orange bar, knowing where the product comes from, it's got a little green arrow next to it. So that has gone up. That's higher up the rankings. It's a stronger driver than it was last year. And also a little bit further down, there's one of the brighter blue arrows with a green, a brighter blue bar with a green arrow next to it, independently certified and verified. That again has gone up a bit since 2 years ago when we last conducted this research. So we've seen a few shifts in the last couple of years in Europe. I've just got a question for Annalie now. So we've seen some shifts. We've seen some shifts here, and we've also seen some shifts in some of the other charts. How are you responding at Nomad to some of the changes in consumer motivations?
So I think the first thing I would just want to say is what we are seeing here in terms of the results, they're very similar to our own internal consumer research. And it clearly shows that within food, largely, taste, quality, convenience are what we call table stakes. That's basically what you need to deliver on to answer to consumers' expectations. And on top of that, very similar to what you're showing, health and sustainability are the fastest growing motivators. And we actually expect those to become table stakes within quite the near future. And what we're doing to drive this change and respond to this is our products already deliver on the taste, nutrition and sustainably sourced requirement. We're essentially a business that is what we call flexitarian at heart. 60% of our revenue is from fish and vegetables. 90% of our sales actually constitutes a healthy meal choice. So really well equipped to answer to those consumer needs already. And because we have such a broad consumer base within Europe, we have a key role to play in helping consumers eat more sustainable and support this evolution in eating habits. So we're continuously promoting flexitarian diets. We're pushing for vegetables increase. We're pushing for more fish consumption. And we use the influence of our brands to really protect and promote the health of the oceans. And we do that quite a lot through the partnership we have with the MSC. So more than 95% of our fish portfolio is certified. And what that does is it actually offers consumers across Europe a wide range of everyday favorites that they can then pick and choose from to deliver their favorite family meals. And some of the trends you talked about really talked about information, traceability, transparency. And another activity we're doing is we have what we call a fish provenance tool. And that actually helps consumers to trace where the fish they eat comes from. So we want to connect, the fish fingers in the pack to actually the deep seas and where that fish is fished. And one thing we think that fish provenance tool does is really it brings the high seas closer to the consumers. So increasing awareness and then also showing them alternatives if they want to impact on that. And besides that, as a frozen food business, I think we are in a really strong position to help consumers reduce food waste, which is another thing that we know is going to impact on the climate change and has a big impact if we can address that. So doing quite a lot of things today already, actually.
Yeah, interesting. And even though, fish is very different, say, from the apparel sector, but I can see some of those trends in some of the work that we've done with clothing companies as well around provenance, traceability, and also on waste as well. So it's just interesting how there's so much learning across different industries. We will talk a little bit about flexitarianism in a moment. But I'm just going to move to focus a little bit on, we've looked at the awareness and importance of independent labels. So let's just focus on the MSC just for a moment. And in our survey, we asked about recognition of the MSC label, as we have done every other year, And we found that this has grown significantly to 54% of people in Europe. And I should say that awareness of other labels, such as the ASC, Fair Trade, and FSC have also grown, especially with younger generations. So this isn't just isolated to the MSC, this greater awareness. And in terms of trust, on the right-hand side there, you can see that 76% of people who are aware of the MSC say that they trust it. And again, this has increased from 69% in 2018. So really solid, sort of solid basis of trust there. Now we're going to move on to some trends in seafood consumption and diets, and touch on some of the things that Annalie mentioned just now. And in this year's survey, we asked a few new questions about how people are consuming seafood. And the chart that we just put up shows that more people have increased than reduced seafood consumption. So the darker blue slice of this pie chart shows that 31% of consumers say they're eating more seafood, and 22% of consumers, seafood consumers, say it's less. So that's a little bit of a shift. The grey is people who are pretty much having the same amount. And then we look at why they're eating more or eating less seafood. We've got some quite interesting findings about reasons. We can see from the chart, we just start with the chart on the left-hand side. That one shows, that one's for the reasons that people give for increasing their seafood consumption. And we can see that it's primarily because the top reason is really because of health. So because people think fish is healthier, for 71% of people, that's the reason for increasing their fish consumption. For others, for 34% of people, they see fish as a replacement for red meat. We will come on to a few more insights around that later, but I just want to look on the right-hand side here at those who say they've cut back on their seafood consumption. And there's several reasons for that. First, people say that they think fish is expensive. That's 47% of people who've cut back. But we can also see here some concern about sustainability issues as a reason for cutting back, for around sort of 30% or so of consumers who have done this. So sort of quite different reasons for increase or decreasing their consumption of seafood. And we have explored just a few of the generational differences in answers to those questions. I should say that these generation differences are slightly less pronounced in Europe than elsewhere, but they're still there. And you can see those top three reasons for increasing seafood consumption. Those are along in the top row there, and they're broken down by different age categories. So younger generations are shown that slightly darker blue colour, and for them, on the left-hand side there, health is slightly less important than it is for older age groups who need to preserve their health, I guess. And when we look at the bottom set of charts and the reasons for reducing seafood consumption, the charts show that younger people are slightly more concerned. It's a significant difference, slightly more concerned about sustainability compared to older generations. And our sense really from this is that the under 35s are starting to explore flexitarianism, partly for environmental reasons, while older generations are actually replacing red meat in their diets for health reasons. But health generally is becoming more important, and we'll see that in a moment as well in some of the recent GlobeScan findings. So just a couple of questions here for Annalie and Richard. First of all, Richard, what do these insights about younger generations, about some of the trends in seafood consumption, what do those mean for the MSC, especially something like flexitarianism and consuming less fish? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, flexitarianism, I like that term a lot. It's a relatively new term, and I think the MSC certainly, advocates the idea of creating balanced diets. We know from many studies out there that an idealistic move to vegetarianism or veganism actually would create probably more problems in the food chains than it would solve. And so I think I like this rising flexitarianism trend, I think it's very in line with what's the role of sustainable seafood and how that can play out in the kind of future diets of the world.
And what about Annalie? What about from Nomad's side? How are you responding to some of these trends around people's consumption habit?
So I think I'll focus my answer on something which is outside of the fish and seafood sector. And one of our most significant initiatives is actually the launch of our Green Cuisine plant-based range. So we rolled it out during the pandemic across 10 markets in Europe. So we're now present in something like 13 markets across Europe. And it really is spot on what the younger generations is asking for. And as I said before, we are what we call a flexitarian at heart, and extending that into plant-based is really the natural thing to do. And what we do is actually we bring that, we call it the power plants, from a brand that consumers trust and already use for their everyday cooking. So we actually make the change really easy for them. And I think that is something important as well. And I noticed what you had on screen about one of the reasons why people were buying or using less fish is that they're not comfortable cooking it. So I think making whatever change it is easy for consumers is going to be really, really critical.
Great, thank you. And it's interesting that you rolled out Green Cuisine came out during the pandemic. So I think now is probably the time to look at what's been happening since we did this research earlier this year. We're going to look at some more recent research, just a few findings on how COVID is affecting or has affected consumer attitudes. So GlobeScan, so the research we've just been looking at took place in around February, just into March, earlier this year. GlobeScan also conducted our annual survey of consumers across the world in June. So a few months later, that was towards the end of the first wave of the pandemic in Europe. This is an annual study of 27,000 people across 27 countries, many of those in Europe. And it's a really good way just to see how general consumer attitudes have shifted. So the next part, for the next part of this webinar, we're just going to share some insights from this survey. It's GlobeScan's Healthy and Sustainable Living study conducted just over 4 months ago. And in the survey, we asked people, we had to ask this big question about how much they are personally affected by three big things. First of all, COVID, then the recession, and then climate change. So you can see those bars on the left-hand side show that 42% of people, this is in Europe, 42% of people in Europe say they are greatly affected by the pandemic. An unsurprising number who felt that way. Then 34% of people said they were greatly affected by the economic recession. That's the middle block. And then on the right-hand side, we've got 33% of people greatly affected by climate change. So the unsurprising context that we had in late June was that COVID, people saw COVID as having significant personal impact, but still climate change is still a significant issue. And that's in Europe, somewhere where people may not have actually experienced directly some of the impacts as much as other regions. So we asked people to say which global problems. So this is less at the personal level. This is mainly more how they saw how important they saw different global problems, the things that they worry about the most. And we can see from this chart that environmental problems are still top of the list of concerns that people have. So between 60 and 64% of Europeans rate these kind of lighter blue environmental issues as very serious. So that's things like depletion of natural resources, climate change, plastic waste, loss of biodiversity. And COVID comes very close behind, but it actually isn't in the top. It isn't at the very top in terms of global problems. And this really is quite unique in Europe, that environmental issues are seen as the most serious global problems. So really, things haven't changed a great deal from what we saw in the results that we shared a bit earlier from the work that we did with the MSC. that people are still just as worried about the environment and just as worried about climate change as they were. So how did some of these concerns translate into attitudes about personal impact and about consumption? Well, what we have seen is really an increase or a sort of intensification of consumer opinion on several different areas, which we just put up on here. So these bars show the percentage of people who express different views particularly strongly. So on the left-hand side, we can see that 82% of people say they're trying to improve their own health and well-being. 71% want to reduce their impact on the environment. 45% feel guilt about their negative impact. And then there's those 38% on the right-hand side there who feel there's this conflict between what's good for them and what's good for the environment. And there really are some significant increases in all of those bars, particularly the ones on the right-hand side compared to 2019 when GlobeScan asked these questions before. So that's what we have seen sort of during the pandemic, has been this sort of almost an amplification or an intensification of people's views. And this is also borne out in our global tracking data. And if you look at the, if we look at the next chart, we can see that this is tracking data from 1999 that GlobeScan has done. And we can see the bar on the right-hand side there, that's for 2020. The top blue part of that shows that 38% of people across the world, this isn't just for Europe, this is globally, say that they have considered rewarding responsible companies, and that's either by buying their products or speaking favorably about them. And it has gone up by 5 percentage points this year, which is very significant, and it's reached an all-time high. So there's that that consideration is very high, but action, the darker blue below that, has remained pretty steady at around 30%. Over the last few years, really pretty much over the last 2 decades. So the intention is there, but the action is lacking. And this is something that we saw a bit earlier from the MSc study as well. So just a couple of questions for Annalie and Richard. First, Annalie, so we've seen this trend towards people wanting to reward responsible companies. You talked a little bit about some of the things you've been doing throughout the pandemic. Maybe you could just tell me what you've seen happening and also how you might be doing things differently at Nomad.
So yes, let me do that. And I think I would just, want to start by saying we have remained open operational throughout this pandemic, and that is thanks to our factory colleagues who've kept production lines running and really made it possible for us to respond to this significant elevated demand. So really grateful for that. And a couple of things about what we've done during the first and second wave and how we've seen that impacted on our business. So during the first wave and the initial lockdown, we stopped all advertising, we stopped promotion, as it felt very much like the right thing to do during those months. And despite that, we actually saw quite an influx in new users. And frozen food has proven to be one of the fastest growing FMCG's categories in Europe throughout this the past couple of months. And 2 of the main drivers behind that is really people prioritize food that is keeping for longer. So that's one of the big advantages of frozen food. It's less perishable. And then also people moving from out of home to in-home consumption. So again, that really has a massive impact. And then linked to that, if we look at the new consumers in our 3 largest markets, so UK, Italy, Germany, millennials are really overrepresented in terms of spending growth amongst those new consumers. And as we've seen, we know that millennials, or the younger generation, they really value food that is healthy, convenient, sustainable. So there's a really good connect and match with those consumers' expectations and what we can deliver as a brand. And now in the second wave, we're actually seeing less panic buying, but we see that consumers are sticking with the brands they trust. So we also see, when we look at our internal data, that many of the new consumers that found us and entered our brands throughout springtime. They are now coming back, and we take that as a sign that, they are recognizing the value that frozen foods and especially our brands bring to them. And we think that is really, a good sign for the future. One of the reasons why I think this will really benefit the work we're doing to preserve the oceans is that I understand there's a higher representation of certified sourced fish in categories like frozen, shelf stable and canned than in some of the other categories. So I think overall that's a really good trend towards a more sustainable food industry and food future.
Thanks. So that's some of the things that Nomad are doing. What about Richard? How are the MSC working with partners to kind of accelerate some of those trends we've seen about people, wanting to reward companies and wanting to buy food that's more responsibly sourced?
Well, first of all, to that point, I'm just going to draw on an observation from one of the MSC's founding partners, Unilever, and actually one of Nomad's founding partners as well, effectively. And they made a very significant shift, as I'm sure everyone knows, to purpose-led brands. And I think they reported last year that something like that those sustainable living brands that they have are growing at 70% faster than the rest of the business. So I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that forward-thinking companies that focus on brands with purpose are making huge strides in terms of business efficiencies as well. And it's this kind of win-win theme that I would like to kind of pick up on with both companies and consumers actually later. So in answer to the second part of the question, the MSC's approach has always been that if we're not at the table with partners, we can't effect change that we advocate for. And so I'd say in my time at the MSC, the level of collaboration with partners that we have has increased significantly. And on a personal level, the ones I find most rewarding to work with are the ones that really have weaved this purpose-led approach into their brand story in a seamless way. I don't think sustainability is as effective if it's a bolt-on element of a brand. It has to be integral to your brand values. And I think Annalise kind of touched on that and how Nomad brands do that very, very effectively.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So we're going to just look, just for the last couple of sort of insights before we move on to more of a discussion, we're going to look at some of the, we saw results around seafood consumption a bit earlier, some interesting results around that. And we can see some of those results borne out by these insights on meat consumption. So the pie chart on the left-hand side shows that 64% of meat eaters would prefer to eat real meat, while 36% would prefer meat-like alternatives made from plants, provided they tasted and cost the same. I know that my colleague Eric, when he showed this on Tuesday in the North American webinar, was quite shocked by this these findings, that it's that as many as 36% of meat eaters would be willing to switch, provided the product tastes and costs the same. On the right-hand side, these are some of the reasons that meat eaters have given for reducing their consumption. And again, we've got health as number one, according to 36% of them. Then number two is actually animal treatment at 25%, and then environment for 13%. So this is really quite in line with the findings that we saw a bit earlier, that health really is a key reason for meat eaters to cut back. And then I just want to just end on the purchase motivators, the ones that we saw some earlier for fish and seafood. These are in the GlobeScan and GlobeScan Health and Sustainable Living study, we found that there was a slightly different set of drivers of purchase for food and drink more generally, and these are shown up on here. And here we can see it's a similar sort of methodology using maximum differentiation, and we can see that taste, price, and health are seen as the top drivers for food and drink choices, and that hasn't actually shifted since last year when we asked this before. So some of it similar to what we saw through the MSc, on the MSc findings on seafood. So we've got taste and health in those top 5, but price is actually ranked higher here. It's second in these results, where if you remember for seafood, it was actually ranked lower, in fact, just below sustainability. And so we know that seafood is really a category where quality, health, sustainability tend to be considered as more important by consumers compared to food and drink categories overall. So that's really the end of the insights. And I just wanted to ask get a few more reactions from Richard and from Annalie. Just starting with Richard, we've seen that, we've seen through all these findings that around this sort of mid to sort of late first wave pandemic insights, that the pandemic is really heightening consumer concerns about health as well as about environmental sustainability. So you've got these two things going on. Which one of those do you think companies and organizations should focus on? Is it health? Is it environment? What's your reaction?
Can I cheat and say both, Caroline? The reason I say that is because, as I kind of alluded to before, the approach I believe that's effective in modern sustainability communications is all about this kind of win-win message. It's not just win-win for business from a sustainability perspective, but I think it has to be for consumers as well. And I think what we do know about consumers is they will shift a little bit towards sustainable choices, but the compromise has to be as minimal as possible. And I would use the kind of very long-term example of the vegan movement. I think vegan version 1.0 that we saw over the past kind of 20 years was very much focusing on guilt and compromise. And if you compare that to veganism that we see headlining supermarket ranges today at front of store and really hitting the mainstream for the first time, and I consider that to be a seismic shift in consumer habits over the past couple of years, it effectively combines health ethics and planetary health as well. And I think, it's created that mainstream appeal in vegan products because of that intrinsic link with health. So I think if you can link them both, you have a very powerful message for consumers where compromise is not extreme.
I'm thinking of other sorts of compromises. So we've got a question coming up about prices and about whether we should sort of move away from thinking about price and thinking about all the other sorts of benefits. Annalie, we know, realistic that the price is still it's an important component of the purchase decision, and we know that a lot of people say that consumers just don't want to pay more for sustainable products. What's your experience around the thorny issue of price?
So yes, so do consumers want to pay more for sustainable products? And I think the answer is yes and no. So unless sustainability really defines your brand and it sits at the heart of it, and that is the key reason for buying it, we shouldn't expect consumers to want to pay more for it. We know that consumers kind of want it all, as we say, and some of the areas we've been touching on, consumers actually expect businesses to address and work on. It's a business responsibility. Carbon emissions very clearly sits in there. It's very little that the consumer can do to influence that. So that is a responsibility of the business. But I don't think that means that sustainability don't bring value. So I've seen studies that kind of says that all other things equal, a product with a clear sustainability benefit is gonna drive penetration, and something like 4 times more likely to drive penetration, something like 3 times more likely to up and drive brand image, and built on that, then actually going to deliver twice the revenue growth. So I think we just need to think about, from a business perspective, what's the value with adding in incremental sustainability benefits. But let's not believe that consumers are going to pay a price premium because we add in some of those. I think it's a different business model that we need to look at. So absolutely, agree with it. consumers, generally speaking, are not going to pay more because we add sustainability benefits to them.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, we are going to move on to just a few comments. I'm going to ask a few questions about the sort of post-COVID era to both of you. Just before we do that, I've just got one question that's come in the Q&A for Richard around, so we've seen that some of the results that we shared earlier showed that consumers are wanting to see, we saw that really strong view about consumers wanting seafood, wanting products to be independently certified. Why do you think that's, you know, this is a lot of the research we've done with you has given some insight in that, but what's your perspective on why consumers want supermarkets' claims to be independently certified? And, you know, is that, how much is that related to trust in supermarkets versus trust in an organisation like the MSC?
I think it's to do with the complexity of sustainability and the claims that are made around sustainability and some of the greenwashing that's been done in various cases as well. And I think MSC, we always say you shouldn't need a degree in sustainable sourcing to make a good choice. And so from our perspective, there is a lot of science and rigor and supply chain understanding behind sourcing sustainably and being able to put a independently certified logo on a product, the MSC logo in this case. And therefore, what consumers really want is something that they can trust, and our trust figures kind of show that we're reasonably good at that in that area, and reasonably strong. And I think when MSC appears on a pack as an independent certification, it creates that shortcut to that the deep science and the deep rigor that is behind that. I don't think any consumer wants to have to interrogate a product or a claim to find out whether it's true or not. I think they just need to have an intrinsic trust, and we know from some of the what we call trust path analysis that you do at GlobeScan for us, that independence is key to the trust that we draw. I think some of the other research that we've done in the past shows that effectively by putting the independent MSC label on a product, that we lend expertise and therefore trust to that product, and that benefits the host brand.
Great, thank you. And trust is going to certainly, it's not going away as something that's very important to people in this current time. So I just want to move on for the last 10 minutes or so of this webinar to look at what's next. And I want to ask Richard and Annalie a few questions about what they think will be the impact of the pandemic on these conscious food consumers. So just starting with Annalie, what are you, I know we've talked about this a little bit, but what are you predicting for trends, consumer attitudes and behaviours for that sort of post-COVID era, which we're hoping to see in 2021? What do you think, you know, some of the things that you think will accelerate, things that will fall away? What are your views on that?
I think there are four things I would probably want to focus on for this question. And the first one is really around health. So I strongly believe that health-led choices will stay. Nutrition as a key motivator is going to, you know, remain really, really strong and probably be stronger than what we're seeing today. And I think that really links to my second point, which is around, we now see people acting for their personal protection. And we know that, you know, the motivation to act is stronger the closer it is to yourself and your family. And some of those trends we're seeing, or some of those shifts in behavior, is really linked to people understanding and making a connection between what I eat and my health. And I think that is something that will remain. Third thing I would bring up is really around sustainable sourcing. It is at the forefront of more people's minds right now, and I believe it's linked to the heightened awareness of, you know, human impact on nature. So if anything good comes out of this pandemic, there is an awareness rising, which I think is really important. But as we go back to normal, I think as businesses we need to give quick and easy reassurance to consumers to help them maintain this behavior. And Richard mentioned labeling, and I think labeling is going to be really key, and labeling will potentially increase in importance, and whether that be through regulations, legislations, or voluntary schemes. But I think labeling is really going to be something we will be seeing more of. And then my final point would be around how we shop. And I'm convinced that online shopping is really here to stay. And again, linking it back to some of the data we saw and some of the data points you talked about, the need for information before. And is then online shopping going to be a risk or an opportunity to provide more information? I think we need to address that and find, how can we use online shopping, the digital environment? How can we use that to provide more of the information that we believe will drive behavior in the way we want to drive it? So those would be the 4 things I'd call out.
Thanks, Annelise. So Richard, how would you respond? So Annelise set out these four trends that she sees. Are any of those ones that you would like to, that you feel are particularly important, or have you got anything to add to that great list?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Annelise said entirely, and she brings a really great perspective, business perspective to this as well. I think the shift that we're seeing, and it is something that is generally quite radical in marketing and consumer understanding, is this shift towards the realization that your personal health is intrinsically linked to the health of the environment around you, either planetary health or more kind of localized. And I think that will become a very significant driver. I think overlying that, there is no doubt, and we all know this, that the recession that will follow the pandemic will have a huge impact. But I'm increasingly confident and actually pleased that we've got a situation where this rise of the conscious consumer appears to be continuing through the pandemic, and I think afterwards as well. And I think that link, it's been a theme throughout this talk today, that link between personal health and the health of the planet, that win-win situation, that if something's good for you and it's good for the planet, it's almost a no-brainer. I think that's where the hope is that we can kind of continue with the good work that we've been doing over the past decade or so.
Yeah, and it's really no accident that GlobeScan calls our annual study the Healthy and Sustainable Living Study, because those things are so interlinked. Okay, so we've just got a few more minutes. There's still questions coming in. We will answer some of those separately, because we've got a lot of questions here, and we'll share those with Annalie and Richard, and we'll come back to you on as many of those as we can. Really just the last question, I think I'd like to look a little bit further ahead for both of you. So just think 5 years from now. Imagine we're doing this webinar again in 2025. Just give me a sense of what you might be doing differently, what you think will be happening in the world in 2025. Just to end on that, just a short answer from each of you, maybe starting with Annalie.
Yes, so from our side, quite a lot more of the same. We will continue pushing the growth of plant-based. We will continue our journey to increase vegetable consumption amongst consumers. We will definitely be looking at encouraging consumers to eat more sustainably sourced fish, ideally more different species. But then if I look a little bit broader than that and outside maybe our own business, I think linked to what I said, there will be a consolidation of plant-based businesses. So I think we'll see something structural changing there. I already touched on labeling. I think we will see more of that. Taxation. I wouldn't be surprised if taxation is coming up to drive consumer behavior in the desired direction. And packaging also, I think we're going to find that we're looking at a completely different way of packaging food. And hopefully, I'd really love to see zero tolerance for food waste. That would be my dream scenario.
Great. And then from the MSC side, Richard, just a quick answer from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen, you've alluded to a few of the trends that are coming through in the younger consumers that we survey. And that heightened awareness of where your food comes from is a trend. So I don't see any reason why we can't predict 5 years' time and say that actually, as those younger generations come through, that this idea that sustainability should be part of the whole package, that will become a mainstream view. And I'm going to shamelessly borrow an expression that one of the guys from Tony's Chocolonely, it's a chocolate brand from the Netherlands, said the other day in a talk, which is that I think the idea that social enterprises are a unique and an innovative thing will become probably the converse, where anti-social enterprises becomes a term that consumers actually just reject. And I really hope that does become the case.
Great vision for both of you for 5 years' time. So we've had an hour of research findings, great discussion, lots of food for thought, lots of food for action. Thanks so much to everybody who's participated, who's joined us. We're going to share the recording and share the presentation deck afterwards. Thanks to my great colleagues, my fantastic colleagues, Robin Miller and Alia Hassim, who've been absolutely instrumental in setting all of this up. And also all the colleagues from the MSC, so Stephanie and others, and above all, Richard, who made all of this happen. Thank you. And finally, just to say thanks to our wonderful guest, Annalie. You've great answers to great questions. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a good day, stay safe and stay well. Thank you.